Good day, everyone, and good evening to the other parts of the world. So I am Andrie Bon Flores, a Save the Frog Scholar recipient last December 2018. And I will talk to you about field techniques in frog survey and assessment. So this is basically for those budding frog conservationists out there. So let me give you a brief background of what frogs are. So as we all know, frogs are amphibians, from which they live both on land and water, and they are ectotherms, which they rely their external temperature. So for the stability of their body temperature, and some species undergo metamorphosis. So where do I find frogs? So as you all know, frogs lives in microhabitats that has enough food resources and moisture for their survival. As you can see right here, the Rhocophorus binoculatus is considered to be an arboreal species because it occupies arboreal microhabitats such as trees, ferns, and shrubs, while the Laminectus lutensis is a semi-aquatic species because it can be found in stream ecosystem and also on ground microhabitats. And then, of course, the ground dwelling Megaphilus nigeri is found on leaf litter and bare ground microhabitats. So these three frog species are endemic to the Philippines. So, of course, if we assess samples or take samples from the field, we use materials in order for us to um, assess them. So first is the headlamps and flashlights. So this can be used during nocturnal survey. So it is in order for us to locate where the frogs are in their habitat. And of course, for storing the frogs, we use plastic containers and cellophanes. And then for the documentation of frogs, we used rulers and calipers for morphometrics and field notes for the remarks and the behavioral observation. And then for the um, capturing amphibians, we use handheld net and gloves, and of course, rakes for those burrowing amphibians. So I will also discuss to you the different sampling techniques in assessing frog in their natural habitat. So first is the transect. So in here we have a 100 meter. So this belt transect is a representative of the entire ecosystem of frogs or the entire habitat from which we take uh, frogs in the sampling area. So, for example, we have a 100 meter, so we can extend it into 5 meter or 10 meter in order for us to quantify the different species that is present in that specific area. So this belt transect can also um, say the abundance, diversity, and of course the distribution of frogs in our specific sites. And then the visual encounter survey. So this method can be used by searching for frogs and then noting the frogs that we have already identified and accounting them. So in this picture, we can see the Pulchrona gondocula and the Limnonectis utensis, which are both endemic to the Philippines. And of course, opportunistic search. So we opportunistically search frogs day and night, and of course, store them into the plastic containers such as the cellophanes. And um, next is acoustic monitoring. So we also do acoustic monitoring in order to if we already know the sound of the frogs, we can say that it is present in the area because of the acoustic surveys. So we also do acoustic surveys in order for us to know the abundance of the species in a specific site. And then the pitfall trapping. So we also use pitfall trapping for those amphibian species that are uh, ground dwelling. So we use pits in order for them to fall off here, and then we can collect them later. So this is how we construct and place pitfall traps. So within the two containers, we can use duct tape in order to connect them. So this is 17.8 centimeter and 15.7 centimeter by width. So we can also use a funnel by using a plastic margarine top, uh, cutting off the bottom and then connect it to the top of the our pit. So this will serve as a pit. So this will it look like. So we will also use fence in order for the amphibians to only go in a certain area which we place the pitfall. So if we place it in a level ground, we can cover it by a wood, which is 5 centimeter above the ground, in order for the water or incoming rain to not flood the pit. And also for the slopy area, we can leave space for water to drain around the trough in order to not flood the pitfall, and also cover it with wood. And then we also catch amphibians by hand and net. So they can be catch also by bare hands. And since amphibians are most active at night, we use flashlights. And if already seen or we use visual encounter survey, it is best to know its color, the size, behavior, and the habitat, of course, vividly. And rakes and spades are useful for searching for burrowing amphibians in the field. So this is how we handle frogs in the field. So for smaller frogs, it is better to not press them because they are vulnerable to pressing and it may hurt them. But however, for the frogs that are larger or medium size, we can press them against their back in order for them to avoid escaping. So this is how we also handle them by collecting morphometrics data. So this is a Barbula boswangensis, which is endemic to Boswanga Island in Palawan, Philippines. And then the morphometrics data. So this is one of the most important um, stage of assessing frogs in our field. So we use to gather morphometrics data in order to identify the species that we have in our sampling site. So as you can see here, there are there are 5 individuals of frogs, but they belong to the same species, even though they have different colors. So this can be quantified and identified by gathering morphometrics data. So these are the amphibian morphometrics that we used to collect in our sampling. So of course, the snout length from the snout to the tip of the eye, and the tympanum distance, the edge to edge of the tympanum, and then the eye diameter is the edge of the eye to the other edge of the eye, and the head length is from the snout to the edge of the tympanic membrane, and the tibial length, and of course, the most important one of all is the snout vent length. So it is from the snout to the anus. And we also record and document the hind leg length, the head breadth, and the number of digits in our frogs. So for microhabitat assessment, we use microhabitat assessment in order to correlate them to the presence of the amphibians that we have in our area. So frogs depends on their environment. So we have different microhabitat parameters that we use to collect in order for them to correlate the distribution, of course, the diversity, and the abundance of the different frog species in our specific area. So we take note of the transect site, the weather condition, the collectors, the habitat type, transect number, the date of the sampling, repetition, or the number of days that we have collected data of, and then the GPS coordinates in order for us to map out where the specific location of our sampling site. And these are some of the microhabitat variables that we collect. So this includes distance to bodies of water, the relative humidity, wet and dry, the number of trees, canopy cover, understory cover, the leaf litter cover, the number of rocks, the temperature of water, soil, and air. And of course, for the added observation, we put them in the remarks. So another important stage of sampling of amphibians is the calculation of sampling effort and species curve. So this is how we justify if we sampled enough in our field sampling. So for the sampling effort, we can calculate it by sampling hours times number of involved person, and then we can correlate it with the species curve or the number of species counted in our area. If we can see the asymptote or the flattened curve, we can already move on to the next area after 3 days. So this means that if we haven't noted any new species or the new species that we have documented, we can move on to the next area that we will be taking samples of. And these are the field guides of the Philippine frog. So field guides vary in the type of locality, especially if you are from a different locality. You should take consideration of finding a field guide that is provided on the internet and other journals. So in here we can see the Philippine amphibians, which is an illustrated field guide. So this is by Alcala and Brown, and it provides a detailed description of the species and also remarks on the range from which it can be found. So, however, this field guide is already outdated, and it is still useful and used today. Next is the amphibians and reptiles of Mindanao. So it is also used in the Mindanao Island. So this is by Nunez et al. 2012, and it also has amphibians, reptiles, birds, and bats and caves of Mindanao. So it also provides a useful description of the different species that we can find in the area. And of course, it has a geographical range description. Finally, the most updated one of all and the most commonly used today is the checklist of Philippine amphibians. So this is a photographic guide of Philippine amphibians. So this includes a list of the different frogs in the Philippines and their map distribution, so that we can say that what we identified is right. So, however, this only tackles um, the distribution and the photographic identification of the frogs, and they don't have explain the description of the frogs in this checklist. So if we are unsure of identification, we can take pictures, take down notes, and of course ask help from our local experts. So take note that field survey is just the first step of biodiversity conservation. So next is the status and challenges of Philippine amphibian diversity and conservation.
Andrie, let's split that into a different talk.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
gonna stop this recording, but before we even move on, if anyone has any questions, let us know. And we do have one from Dr. Sharma, who I'm assuming knows how to identify a frog species in his own manner, because he's definitely done that with acoustic tools. But he wants to know, how do you do it? How do you identify frog species based on acoustic tools? What is your method?
Um, Based on acoustic tools, we use to record frogs. Personally, we catch frogs and wait them to call, and then we record the acoustics of the sound of the frogs, and then we used to memorize what the sound of the frog is, and then identify them using that method.
All right, let's go ahead and we'll end this right here. Thank you, Andrie, and everyone stick around because he will be back in 30 seconds.